Gunnel Grabbers of 1985 consisted of the crews of Bob Doctor and Boo Witzenberger, Jim Stackus and Tommy Ray, Tom and Bud Needhammer, Sheldon and Cliff Buckmaster, Joe Bauer, Russ LeBeau, Ron Snyder, Greenhorn, Mark LeBeau, Spence and Al Damschoter. Two interesting facts this year. We had 4 father and son teams, and we had a 50-year span of age between the youngest member and the oldest. The trip was 60 miles in length and was an interesting combination of good canoeing, excellent fishing, cold, rainy weather, good whitewater, good food, and no black flies. The trip started at a point 400 miles northwest of the Sioux, about 10 miles from Nakina, Ontario. We left our canoers at the flight service and launched the canoes at a roadside for the first leg of the trip. Tommy takes a little warm-up, and then we all head downstream. Our first campsite was only 4 miles downstream. We had a feast of steak and baked potatoes and coleslaw for our first meal. Spence and Mark caught a nice mess of walleyes, which they cleaned and served up at the evening campfire. The next morning, we were on the river at the crack of 10 a.m. Easy paddling for a stretch to a small lake. There's Cliff and Sheldon. Taking a nice leisurely paddle. Spence and Al. Mark and Ron Snyder. Joe and Russ LeBeau. It was cold and tough paddling across the lake into a strong headwind. A trapper's cabin was located along the north shore, and we stopped and investigated. Found it to be a real mansion compared to most trappers' cabins we have come across on other trips. The usual junk cluttering up the place, empty gas cans, snowshoes, and other trappers' paraphernalia. on the lake, more headwind, and then a continuation of the drowning river. A short stretch of whitewater followed where Jimmy and Tom got in some minor trouble. Followed by Ron and Mark making the same mistakes. And then finally, Cliff and Sheldon repeating. A few wet feet, but nothing more. Joe takes a nice sized speckled trout off of the pool below the rapids while waiting for the others to get reoriented to going straight instead of sideways. A few portages were necessary throughout the trip, but nothing too difficult or too long. Here's Jimmy and Bud and Mark negotiating one trail. Back into the water with a series of mild rapids interspersed with stretches of flat water. A leisurely stretch with Cliff and Sheldon. Russ and Joe. Spence and Al. Tom and Jimmy. Boo, Bob. Finally, Ron and Mark. Several log jams were encountered which blocked the complete width of the river. We managed them by lifting the loaded canoes one by one over the obstruction. It is always a balancing act getting over the logs, trying to find firm footing. A day of good paddling, although the skies were overcast all day, as could be denoted by our rain gear, with periods of cold and misty rain. Our campsite at Bald Rock was extremely small, but we managed to get all 7 tents placed. Firewood was a little scarce, so we had to scrounge for that, ending up with mostly driftwood. This was the spot where Tommy's hat got well initiated. Bald Rock falls with a sloping shelf at the drop of about 4 feet. Spence ran the falls empty and alone. No problem. Russ followed and got caught sideways in the current. Once over, though, it was to the amusement of all the spectators. But like a real Green Beret trooper, he tried again successfully. The next morning, Bud and Tom ran the falls before loading and heading downstream. Two nice specks were caught at the base of the falls by Sheldon. Downstream, a couple short portages with some fine speck fishing along the way. More portaging, more fishing. That's Jimmy underneath the blue canoe. Mark fishing and landing a nice speck. Followed by Tommy Ray landing a beauty after a good workout. Finally, a display of the day's catch of 14 specks, all measuring between 16 and 20 inches. Tuesday was a layover day at Jack Pine Rapids, a beautiful sight, almost comparable to a state park. We arrived early and had a nice, sunny, relaxing afternoon. Here's Boo prepping for the Saturday night dance. Bob Doctor developed a painful earache, so the layover was a welcome stop for him. The following morning was cold and rainy, so most everyone spent the day cutting wood, reading, hovering around the fire. Here's Russ giving 110% on the camp wood saw. The rapids alongside the campsite were beautiful, but did not produce many fish, even though Joe and Tom fished pretty hard. We ate well throughout the trip, and particularly well during the one-day stop. When the rains came, we erected a tarp shelter and spent a lot of time underneath, warming ourselves around the fire and drying clothes and shoes. The morning following the layover, we were on the river by about 10 a.m. The water was quite swift, with all of us running some unmarked Class 1 and 2 rapids. We took our longest portage around some Class 4 rapids. At one point in the trail, we were high above some beautiful rapids, so we stopped and took the group picture. It was so beautiful. We had a nice mess of speckled trout to show off and put into the camp picture. It was truly a beautiful spot. The last day on the river was under overcast skies with a light drizzle throughout the day. The river started out flat with some fairly challenging rapids following. Jim and Tom were very successful fishing this last day, so our last camp meal was all the speckled trout you can eat. Truly gourmet eating. The last campsite was hacked out of a jack pine woods. Early Friday morning, our pickup plane buzzed the camp to let us know he was ready to pick us up. We hurriedly broke camp and made the 1-mile portage to Supon Lake where the plane landed. 4 trips were made in the Otter, each trip carrying 2 canoes and 3 or 4 passengers. It was a perfect day for flying, and the trip out went perfect with only a short wait necessary for those going on the last trip. As we flew over and viewed the rugged terrain from above, we are again reminded of the awesome expanse of wilderness that make up Ontario, open only to planes and canoeists like ourselves. We arrive back in Nakina where we load cars and are on the road by 11:30, well ahead of our planned schedule. We spent the night in Wawa Friday night, then on to Petoskey on Saturday. And as we look back on our trip, we have a collage of memories: campfires, whitewater, drying out, campfire cooking, good fishing, good whitewater, a few minor mishaps. A rainy afternoon. Good food. Cocktail hours. Our Canadian friends, 4 of whom we ran into on the trip, waiting for the morning plane. And finally, good comradeship.